Hi, in this series of videos I'm going to put the candidates for the 2019 local government elections in Hamilton on a tier list based around my opinions on who I think has the best policies for this city. To do this, I'm picking some specific issues that face Hamilton City and reading up on the candidates to see how they might respond to them. The first thing I'll look at is how the candidates are likely to protect and promote the city's cultural diversity. With racism and fascism spreading worldwide, I would like to see the candidates explaining how they will work towards ensuring that all are a happy, harmonious and productive members of our community. The second issue is more complex, the economy. I have here a graph of Hamilton City's GDP per capita from 2000 to 2018. As you can see, we were growing wealthier per person before 2007, but then there was a financial crisis and we got poorer from 2007 to 2010. There was a slight recovery up to 2012, and then basically stagnation since then. Hamilton City's per capita economic growth over the last 6 years has been less than the annual economic growth the city achieved in 2002, 3, 4, 5, 7 and 12. Hamilton has not yet recovered from the last recession, and it seems like another one is coming soon. So the second thing I'll be looking for is how will the candidates try to improve the economy of the city. The third issue is the environment, and there were a few things I wanted to focus on, but I decided that the big one is the important one, climate change. How will the candidates work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and how will they aim to mitigate the negative impacts of climate change? I will, although, give bonus points if the candidates also have ideas about biodiversity loss, urban ecology and sustainable development. The fourth is the social sphere, and I would like to see ideas on how the candidates will respond to the high levels of deprivation in Hamilton. The most recent data I could find is the New Zealand Index of Multiple Deprivation from the University of Auckland, which shows that around 60% of Hamilton are in the most deprived 40% of New Zealand. Another way of saying this is that Hamilton has 50% more people suffering from high or very high levels of deprivation than a statistically average New Zealand city. So I'll be looking to see what the councillors will do about this. The fifth issue is around the council's finances. Basically, Hamilton City Council has been operating a low rates, high debt financial strategy for the last decade or more. In 2018, Hamilton City had the 24th lowest rates of the 64 territorial authorities in New Zealand, while having the 7th highest debt financing cost per ratepayer in the country. This strategy relies on the council's revenue increasing as a result of the city expanding, property prices increasing, and economic growth. However, over the past decade, this has not been happening. The council's debt-to-revenue ratio has increased steadily from 107% in 2009 and is expected to reach 215-ish% in 2022. At this point, the City Council plans to stop taking on more debt and let increasing revenues lower this ratio to a safer level. However, if the council doesn't stop taking on debt, or revenue doesn't increase as expected, then we may run into trouble with our lenders, as they've told the city not to go over a 250% debt-to-revenue ratio. What I'm looking for from councillors here is how committed they are to transition the city away from debt, what they will look for in improving the council's revenue, and what they are thinking in terms of the financial sustainability of the city council. The last thing I'll look at is something I don't hugely care about, but a lot of people do. That is the representation that people will bring to the council table. Many people have noticed that our council is currently noticeably old, white and male. However, the most overrepresented minority is actually business owners and senior managers, who make up 7 of the 13 representatives. The others are made up of career politicians and former police officers. There is also Mark Bunting, who has spent a long time as a board member of the Well Energy Trust, which is kind of a politician and kind of a business person, so yeah. All our current councillors come from 3 occupations: business people, career politicians and police. If a candidate is from one of these 3 occupational groups, I'll count it as a big negative, but they could make up for it by being from an underrepresented group. I don't intend for this to be a determining factor in the ranking, since I don't think that a person being from an underrepresented group necessarily makes them the best representative, either for the city or for their group. However, if I'm on the cusp of putting someone at a certain rank, I may use this as the deciding factor. One big thing I'm not considering is transport. Transport obviously affects everything that I'm looking at here, in quite a major way actually. So initially, when I was doing this, transport was dominating every other consideration. However, when I tried moving it into its own category, I had to rate cycleways versus footpaths versus buses versus electric cars, and it all became kind of boring and uninformative, so I've decided to leave it out entirely. It's also important to note that how I rank the candidates is my own opinion, and as such is dependent on my own values, etc., so it is subjective. I'll just put up my political compass here instead of going to my biases. If you don't know what you're looking at, this is basically saying I'm as far left as you can go, and I'm most of the way down towards the hippie side of things. Also, I'm only going to be looking at the candidates' online presence. I'm not going to talk to them or ask them questions or consider anything I have seen or heard of them directly, with one exception. I'll just be looking at websites, Facebook, Twitter, etc., as well as news articles that I can find. It's also worth noting that the research for this took place over a couple of weeks, so it may not necessarily be the most up-to-date, even when released. It's always worth doing your own research. Also, I'm bound to have missed things or made mistakes, so again, do your own research. With that done, let's get into it. In this video, we are going to examine the Hamilton East candidates for City Council. First up, we have James Casson. He is a current councillor, a former police officer, and an old Pākehā guy, so he doesn't do well on diversity. He also doesn't do very well anywhere else. On promoting cultural harmony, he fails because a few years ago he made a statement on Facebook calling for violence against refugees in Europe. He left his job at Immigration NZ over that statement, and he has apologised to Hamilton's Muslim community, but to my mind he has a long way to go to come back from that. He also recently had a bit of a rant on people on Facebook, mourning the dead from the Christchurch mosque shootings earlier this year. So again, I'm not going to give him a good mark on promoting cultural harmony. I don't see James saying much about the economy at all. The closest thing I see to an economic initiative is to reduce red tape for small businesses, which I'm going to give him a slightly negative mark for. Basically, my thinking is that regulation exists for a reason. Something bad happened one time, and someone put in place a rule to stop it happening again. I'm fine with challenging specific regulations because they're no longer fit for purpose. At least we can have a conversation about that. But someone says they're just going to cut regulations for reasons of ideology. They are probably just going to cause those bad things to happen again, like what happened with leaky homes back in the day or Ihu Mātau now. Without specific regulations or reasoning, this logic's going to get a negative mark. On climate change, James Casson is abysmal. He's a climate change denier, or at least he denies that climate change is anything special and probably isn't caused by people. I made a video about his speech in the council chamber on climate change if you want to know more, but I'll warn you it's embarrassing. On deprivation, James talks a lot about crime, which is good because crime disproportionately affects people who suffer from deprivation. However, he is focused on Flagstaff and Rotorua, which are the least deprived areas of our city, so he's basically about protecting the well-off rather than the needy. Finances are the last chance for James to get a positive mark, and he doesn't quite make it. He wants to end frivolous spending, but without defining what frivolous spending is, he just sounds like he thinks he's a magical man who will do what every single councillor over the last 160 years has wanted to do, but better. He also wants the city to live within its means, which I assume means no more debt and a massive cut to council spending in the region of a quarter of current council spending, which would hurt both the economy and the deprived. I should give him a very negative score here, but I suspect that this is all empty rhetoric, and I'm feeling bad about it because they've given him so many negative marks. So I'm only going to give him a slightly negative mark here. Still, with negative marks all around, James earns a solid F overall. Jack Gielen is a musician, a counsellor, and a priest of some kind, so he would bring a unique perspective to Hamilton City Council, and that's the nicest thing I'm going to say about him. Jack doesn't have any online campaigning presence I could find, for which I am thankful, so instead I'll tell you a story about the first time I met Jack. It was back in 2009, and I was at an anarchist movie night, sitting in the back row, as is my habit, and this guy walks in and sits next to me and tells me that there is nothing worse than a young man committing suicide. I think that's a bold conversation starter, but I'll bite, so I say, what about a pregnant woman committing suicide? That led to a 10-minute rant about how I was incredibly wrong, because a man was the head of a family and contained the spirit of the family, so the family would continue so long as he was alive, regardless of how many other family members died. It didn't even matter if he had a family. Every man contains the spirit of a potential family, and that is the most important thing. So yeah, Jack did not create a good impression, and I've tried to avoid him ever since. The main news story about him is from ages ago, when he made a habit of going to the funerals of children that had committed suicide, and trying to get some counselling work by telling their parents that their other children were at risk of suicide now. So Jack hasn't put anything online for me to grade him against. However, he's a joke, and I'm giving him a rank in the F tier anyway. Garry Mallett is a former businessman and a former ACT Party president and a long-serving councillor, elected for the first time in 1998, I believe. In regards to cultural harmony, I'm giving him a poor mark. He is homophobic, which we can't ignore. If you Google him, you'll find a number of articles of him getting in trouble for homophobic statements, the most recent of which is from 2017, when he used homophobic slurs to object to the fact that one of the reports given to a council subcommittee was on pink paper. He is also a Hobson's pledger, and generally argues in favour of forcing all cultures in New Zealand to fit into the Pākehā mould. So, poor marks. However, to my knowledge, he has never celebrated a massacre or called for violence against minorities, so sadly he's not on the level of some of our other council candidates in this regard. On economics, Garry doesn't propose anything in particular that I can see. He is very much a free market kind of guy, so he probably wants the council to do nothing and let businesses do their thing. On climate change, Garry is ignoring the evidence. He isn't sure if climate change is happening, or if it's man-made, or if people can actually minimise it, and even then he isn't sure if doing so would be cost-effective. Because of this uncertainty, he is opposed to the more informed members of council and the community taking action, so bottom marks on this issue. On deprivation, Garry doesn't have much to say. He's opposed to the living wage. If you couldn't guess, he's more about letting the market decide what people should be paid, rather than ensuring everyone has sufficient income. Finances is Garry's strong point, and the main, almost the only, thing he talks about. However, I'm going to give him a neutral mark here. The best I can describe Garry's viewpoint is that he sees rates as a moral issue, and wants them as low as possible, for the sake of being as low as possible. Because of this, he makes no mention of the city's debt or overall financial position. He is interested in cutting spending, but only to reduce rates. However, unlike most people that advocate for cutting spending, Garry actually proposes specific programs to cut, in particular the 2 hours free CBD parking and the 100% developer subsidy in the CBD, are programs he would like to cut that I would also kind of agree with. So I'm going to give him a neutral mark here, despite his moralising and focus on blindly cutting rates. Tony Dixon is a perennial candidate, although I can't actually remember anything from his previous runs for the council and mayoralty. He is running on a Hamilton Ratepayers Association ticket. His Facebook page hasn't been updated since 2016, so I'll ignore it. He has a profile on the Ratepayers Association website, and I'll say that the only thing I can grade him on is finances. He thinks rates are too high, and he wants lower increases. He also thinks debt is too high, and he wants to pay that down. Therefore, his solution is to cut non-specific costs. So I'll give him a negative mark on finances, and no grade anywhere else. So you'll note I've spelt Andrea McLaughlin's name 2 different ways. That is because the name on the elections website and the name on the Ratepayers Association website is spelt differently. Andrea is another one of the Ratepayers Association candidates. There is a link to a Facebook page on her candidate page, but that Facebook page hasn't been made public yet. So, I'm sure you've heard this before, but she is concerned about rates increases and concerned about the debt, and she wants to cut costs, so I'm giving her a slightly negative mark on finances. However, I will also answer a question Andrea asks on the Ratepayers Association website. She states Hamilton is growing by about 11% over the next 10 years, and the city's debt is growing by 97%, and with incredulity asks if this could be right. The answer to that is yes. Hamilton has one of the lowest levels of rates in New Zealand and one of the highest levels of population growth in New Zealand. Those figures are the consequence. At first, I knew nothing about Krishna Reddy. I couldn't find anything at all. But luckily the Hamilton Ratepayers Association updated their website, and here's one of their candidates. He is a university lecturer in claims management and governance experience, but he still gets some diversity credit for being an immigrant and from an ethnic minority. Like all the Ratepayers Association candidates, he thinks the low level of rates in Hamilton is too high and the debt is too high, and Krishna will cut costs. He takes a slightly different tack from the other candidates. He will develop a plan considering the city's growth, rates, infrastructure and capability, which sounds to me a lot like the 10-year plans, district plans and annual plans that the council already does, but good luck to him. Mark Bunting is a businessman. He came to the Hamilton City Council from the Rel Energy Trust, so he's also kind of a career politician. He's probably best known though as a radio DJ. He has served one term on the council and is going for a second. He has a Facebook page, but his main emphasis seems to be more playgrounds, so if that's your thing, maybe this is the guy for you. Unfortunately, I don't really see anything to rank him on in terms of culture, economy or finances, but that leaves climate change and deprivation. On climate change, he voted in favour of climate action and for declaring a climate emergency, so I'll give him a slight positive score here. On deprivation, though, Mark voted against the proposal to pay some contractors a living wage. Although he claims in a Facebook video that he supports paying the living wage to council staff and believes all companies should, he said he would explain why he voted against it in the future. But until then, I'm going to say actions speak louder than words, and I'll count this against him. And unfortunately that's all I have to go on for Mark Bunting. Meleane Burgess is a Samoan businesswoman and seems to be very busy doing things in the community, like founding the Waikato Pacific Business Network. Unfortunately, Meleane doesn't say anything much about what she intends to do or support once on council. She will get positive marks on culture, since she wants to see the diversity of Hamilton's communities represented on council. But I am giving her a negative mark on finances because of a single sentence she said in response to someone's comment. Meleane doesn't want any more rate rises, which is quite dangerous financially since the council is planning rate rises of almost 4% per annum, and even that will bring us close to the 230% debt-to-income ratio in a few years' time. Without something else to compensate for this loss of income, even a few years of 0% rate increases could do real harm to the city. On climate change, the economy and deprivation, I don't see anything of note, although Meleane is very active on Facebook, so I possibly just didn't scroll far enough. Looking at her score here, she kind of should be a high D tier, but because the City Council could really benefit from having some Pacific representation on the council, I'm actually going to use my discretion and bump her up to a low C tier. Andrew Bydder is another Hamilton Ratepayers Association candidate. Interestingly, he's an architect and a project manager. However, the only information I can find on him is the Ratepayers Association website, which is very limited in his case. He is concerned about rates and debts but doesn't propose any solution beyond being a problem solver, so I'm giving him a neutral mark for everything. Brian Hamilton is a current councillor. He's the most recent addition to the City Council, and is a businessman, but he is young. I decided that 40 is the cutoff, and Ryan is 39 years old, so he just barely brings some diversity there. Ryan also has a decent web presence under the tagline Hamilton for Hamilton. On the cultural front, Ryan doesn't say anything or suggest anything for me to mark him on. However, he did mention that he keeps learning about minority cultures in the city as a result of his role, and I think being open to learning about other cultures is a positive first step, so I'll give him a small positive mark here. In the economy, Ryan doesn't propose much specific. He is stoked about the recent economic growth. Ryan sees his role as being an advocate for economic growth in Hamilton and the Waikato. He recognises that economic successes in the Waikato region also benefits Hamilton, but is unclear what he wants to do to support economic growth in the city or region. Still a slight positive grade for recognising that our economy is regional. Regarding climate change, Ryan voted against the proposal to declare a climate emergency, and he also voted against the proposal to treat climate change with urgency and develop a new climate change action plan. His logic seems to be that Hamilton was already acting on climate change, and therefore didn't need to develop an action plan with the resulting targets and measurements. He speaks as if he's a fan of action rather than platitudes, but I have not seen him propose any action on climate change beyond what the council has already done. So I'm going to give him a big negative here, but at least he doesn't seem to be a climate change denier. On deprivation, Ryan has nothing at all that I can see. However, he did vote in favour of paying council contractors a living wage, so he gets positive marks for that. On finances, I'm going to give him a negative mark. He gives 2 ways he wants council to better manage its finances. Firstly, he wants council to become more cost-effective, but without providing any specifics on what this means. Secondly, he wants more community organisations and businesses to give the council money to do things, which is nice when it comes with no strings attached, but I'm pessimistic about such things. Brad Hills is a student who has just completed a social science degree and wants to be a teacher, so he does well in bringing a new perspective to council. Unfortunately, I think his campaign is only just getting off the ground, so I don't have much to go on for ranking him. However, I will say that in his introductory video he talks repeatedly about wanting an inclusive council and putting sustainability and the environment at the forefront of council decision making. So I'll give him a point for both the culture and climate change, although I would recommend checking him out later for more information. Rob Pascoe is a current councillor and was previously an accountant and became a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers New Zealand. His review will be quick since he really only has one policy on his Facebook page. He wants to get rid of Andrew King. Other than that, he did vote against paying cleaners $20 an hour, but did vote for climate action, so with 1 negative and 1 positive mark, he's going to end up on a C. I actually can't find much information about Mike West. At the time of writing, all I can find is a Facebook page created for the 2018 by-election, which hasn't been updated since February of that year. That page is actually a bit light on details as well. Mike is a bit of a one-note kind of guy. However, I did find that he owns an engineering business if you're interested in the diversity aspect of things. Mike's one note is that the council rates increases are too high. He wants to reduce them by cutting spending. He did propose specific things to cut back in 2018, things like the Central Library, Claudelands Event Centre, FMG Stadium and Seddon Park. So I'll actually give him a pity point since he is at least proposing specifics, although I'm far from endorsing these cuts. Other than that, he did say no to supporting a living wage back in 2018, so I'll give him a negative mark for deprivation, and on the rest he hasn't had anything to say. I'm kind of tempted to give him negative marks across the board because he seems to be adverse to anything that costs money. However, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and a low C tier ranking. Margaret Forsyth is a former netballer, former police officer, and is running for what would be her 3rd term on the Hamilton City Council should she be elected. I don't see much on her Facebook page that could fit into the cultural, economic or financial rankings, so we are limited to climate change and deprivation. On climate change and the environment, she does well. She supports a climate action plan, although other than her gully reforestation plan, she seems to be leaning heavily on individual lifestyle choices as being the solution to climate change. So she gets good marks, but not full marks. Regarding deprivation, Margaret supports the People's Project, which has been working to reduce homelessness in Hamilton, so again I'll give her a positive mark here. Oddly enough, I can't find any online presence for Peter Humphries, although he's regularly quoted by the media. He is the former Hamilton Christian Men's Shelter manager, and he was once in a quiz night team with me. We came second. He was also born in Wales. However, without an online presence, I can't really rate him on much. I will give him full marks on deprivation, though, since he is regularly quoted on the media with solid ideas about how to reduce homelessness in the city. This is enough to give him a B rating, although he would probably deserve a higher rating if there was more information about what he thought on other issues. Lisa Lewis is under 40 and describes herself as a self-employed businesswoman, but I'm going to ignore that because her business was as a sex worker. She is the only one of the mayoral candidates that doesn't come from the usual 3 occupations, and with her age and gender, she is the clear winner in bringing diversity to council. But let's look at her policies and vision, which are actually important. In the cultural sphere, she makes some strong and clear statements. She will work hard for all the diverse cultures of Hamilton. She will not tolerate discrimination and will welcome people into our city with respect and promote trust. She doesn't offer any specific proposal on how she will work to end discrimination, but her heart is in the right place. In terms of economics, her idea is to improve Hamilton's economy by promoting tourism, which is fine. It's a sector of the economy where Hamilton is well placed to succeed, but again, she has no specifics beyond promoting and showcasing Hamilton's attractions. On climate change, Lisa has written more than any other candidate, but most of it is a long quote from the Ministry of Environment, or the Ministry for the Environment. But beyond that, she thinks that the council has a responsibility to support communities to adapt to climate change, and stresses the need for significant action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Again, no specifics, but she's signalling she will support action on climate change. In terms of reducing deprivation, she has a few policies that will reduce it. She wants more space in homeless shelters, she wants more CCTV cameras in high-crime zones, which, if data-driven, will largely benefit disadvantaged communities, and hopefully will act as a deterrent to reduce crime in a non-punitive way. She also wants to build more houses to increase housing affordability, so that will have a positive impact on reducing levels of deprivation in Hamilton, although I really would have liked to have seen more details on her plan to build more houses. In terms of finances, I find Lisa a little bit incoherent. She mentions the city's debt and she wants to play it down, but she also wants to limit rate rises. Her solution is to cut wasteful spending and defer major projects. The only thing I specifically read her discuss postponing are public artworks, but at the same time she wants to increase the pace of footpath repair and wants to build an indoor skate park in Hamilton. So unless she ends up shuffling a lot of money around and cutting a huge chunk of council services and projects, this isn't really feasible. So ultimately I'm rating Lisa slightly negatively for finances, since she basically seems to be wanting to make non-specific budget cuts to solve the city's financial problems. Still, Lisa is in the top half of mayoral candidates and, in my opinion, getting the B tier all to herself. Unfortunately, Maxine Van Oosten's online campaign presence is difficult to find. Her Twitter hasn't posted since 2017. She has a personal Facebook page which indicates that her Instagram is her main campaigning thing, but she only has a few posts there, and while they are all recent, they are all her going to events with no policy. However, she does have a campaign page on Facebook. For whatever reason, though, it doesn't tend to come up on Google searches. Maxine is a woman and a union organiser, so she gets positive marks for diversity. However, I can't really give her much marks elsewhere since there is so little on her page about what she wants. On culture, climate change and the economy, I see nothing at all to rate her on. On deprivation, she is a big supporter of the living wage movement, so there are positive marks there. And regarding city finances, late last year, Maxine requested an independent audit of council decision-making in property purchases around Victoria Park. Basically, the council paid a couple of $1 million higher than the most recent valuations, and seemed that they would pay the current leaseholders to end their leases early. So Maxine gets points here for trying to make council decisions, making more honest and transparent from outside council. Anna Smart is a real estate agent and a founder of the Rotatuna Business Network. She has a website, blog, Facebook page and Twitter, and is very active on social media. So I'm bound to have missed something important, but from what I see, Anna doesn't give specifics on anything, so I don't really feel able to give her high marks anywhere. On culture, she has spent time recently at multicultural events and she wants the council to use its resources to promote a diverse community, so I'll give her a slightly positive mark for that. On climate change, she was in the front row of the audience at the recent climate emergency debate, and she has said she would have voted to declare a climate emergency, so again, positive marks there. On deprivation, she talks a lot about housing and has a few specifics. She wants council to make it easy to build high density housing, although she does walk that back slightly by saying that the current increases in density are changing the characters of some subdivisions, and adds that Hamilton needs to take land from our neighbours to expand outwards as well, but I'll still give her a slightly positive mark here. Finances are a big thing for Anna, but her main emphasis is greater transparency in council finances, and although she says finances will improve, in the video she says this will be done through creative business partnerships. I'll leave this as a neutral rating since I suspect this will be public-private partnerships with all the drawbacks that they bring. I didn't actually see anything on the economy online from her, so I can't rate her on that front. Kesh Naidoo-Rauf is a young Fijian Indian businesswoman born in South Africa, and she married a Muslim, so she does very well in the diversity on council score. If only she didn't own a pharmacy, she would be perfect. She also is far more detailed on her intentions for the city than most candidates, which is also fantastic for someone like me. On cultural harmony, she gets good marks. She really wants to see the council table reflect Hamilton's ethnic diversity, and further, she wants policies to integrate all the intersectional groups of our city. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it sounds great. She also intends to work hard to lessen the gap between minority communities and council. Regarding the economy, Kesh recognises that our economy is regional and wants to work with the region to keep the economy growing. Otherwise, she wants to support small businesses and tourism to help Hamilton's economy. There isn't anything bad here, so a positive score, but there also aren't any specifics to really give her a high score. On climate change, she wants to actively work to reduce carbon emissions and support tree planting, which is fine, positive marks here. She also wants sustainability to be considered in every decision the council makes, so more good news. On deprivation, she wants to solve the housing crisis by cutting red tape, which I'm not a fan of. But moving on, she wants to provide more support to charitable groups to solve social issues, so I'm going to give her a neutral mark here. Regarding finances, Kesh's big thing is being more thorough in examining spending with an eye to pay down Hamilton's debt. So I'm going to give her a neutral mark here. Non-specific cost-cutting is bad, as I'm sure you've heard before. But it's good to see someone that acknowledges the need to reduce debt, instead of simply reducing rates. Tim Young seems like an interesting character. He is a young businessman making educational computer games, but he is tetraplegic, so he'll bring some representation for a disadvantaged community. Even the fact that he is campaigning has already raised awareness for the need to improve the accessible facilities in our city. On the cultural scale, I couldn't see anything to rank Tim on. On the economy, Tim doesn't have any specific policy I can see. However, he repeatedly argues for getting out in front of technological change, which would have the benefit of allowing Hamilton businesses to better exploit these technologies and the resulting productivity increases. So I'll give him a positive mark here. On climate change, he does well. He also criticised the very obvious errors in James Casson's and Garry Mallett's speeches on climate change. He acknowledges that climate change is one of the most pressing issues of the near future, and has said that the council needs a zero-carbon plan with clear steps to get there. He also wants the council to use a lot more solar energy amongst other policies that would impact positively on climate change. Finally, he wants to maintain tree cover in new developments in order to preserve biodiversity, so he gets top marks on climate change and the environment. Regarding deprivation, I'm giving Tim a very good mark. He is very big on accessibility, which is one of the major reasons disabled people suffer from such high levels of deprivation. His housing policy is also interesting. He wants to minimise housing costs by using flat-pack houses and automation. Personally, I think the price of housing is driven by supply and demand rather than the cost-plus model this implies, but I'm for giving it a go. On finances, I'm going to give Tim a slightly positive mark. He wants to keep rates low, but his emphasis is on long-term fiscal responsibility, and that includes the cost of climate change, inequality and poor innovation. So I'm not sure where the balance will land, but I'll give him a positive mark for considering the long term. So based on his policies, Tim Young deserves an A ranking, and a very good A ranking. However, I'm gonna bump him up to S tier. The fact that he is disabled would actually be a huge benefit to council and would force them to take accessibility issues for the disabled community much more seriously than they have done in the past. And for that reason, I think this is a really solid opportunity to use my diversity discretion, and it would also give Hamilton City Council its only S-tier candidate in this current election cycle. And here you have the completed tier list for the candidates in the 2019 election. I've talked a lot, there's a lot to think about here, but I hope you found this useful and perhaps given you a place to start on your own research. So good luck with voting. Bye.